Welcome to another exciting podcast of Royal Oak Victory Church. We're glad you've joined us. We are a community devoted to God, connected to others, and influencing our world.
All true increase and enlargement is firstly an inside job. It's an inside job. That's just the way God created it. It's a universal principle that He has put in motion. And when you think about it, there's a lot of things in creation that way, right? A lot of things in nature grow from the inside out. A cell grows from the inside out. A seed grows from the inside out. An egg from the inside out. Even your waistline grows from the inside out. And if you can't say amen, say, oh me. Oh me. Well, spring's coming, we'll get more active, right? That's what we tell ourselves anyway. It grows from the inside out. It's a universal principle, and yet the odd thing is that even though it's universal, as it is, it's easy to get this mixed up and out of order. It's easy. I know it is in my life. Until before we know it, we're spending far more time and energy trying to increase, expand our outer life on the outside, while we are neglecting and starving out the condition of our heart and our inner life within. The reason I say that is because I've struggled with it myself. I struggle with it all the time. It's a mindset that says the more I can do and achieve, the more I can accomplish and increase, the more I can purchase, accumulate, gather, and assemble on the outside of my life, then the more contented and fulfilled and happier I will be. It's the sign of the times. It's kind of the niche of our culture. And because of it, we get so caught up and preoccupied with the outside of our lives that we begin to ignore and neglect the condition of this precious inner world of ours. That's what happens. And so because of it, it's a little wonder why so many people have such a hard time coping today. It's because they're living their lives from the outside in. It's no wonder that the number one problem in North America is stress. It's no wonder that people feel so stretched and overextended and pushed way beyond their healthy, normal, sane limit in which they were meant to live. It's because whenever our outward world and whenever our outward activity and growth begins to exceed the depth and health of our inner world, we're in the danger of contracting SHS, the dreaded shrinking heart syndrome. Right? We're in danger. We're in danger of what I call a collapse or a meltdown or an implosion, whatever you want to call it. You might say, does that really happen? Happens all the time. People whose outer world is a billion times bigger than their inner world. They are outwardly large and inwardly small. You know, a perfect example of this is the multi-billionaire by the name of Howard Hughes. I mean, all he ever wanted was more, right? More on the outside. More money, more wealth, more power, more fame. And so what he did is he took his inheritance from his father and turned it into $1 billion fortune. He wanted more on the outside. And when that wasn't enough, he broke into the Hollywood scene and soon became a filmmaker and a star. And when that wasn't enough, he threw himself in all kinds of sensual pleasures, paying huge sums of money to indulge every sexual fantasy he had. And when that wasn't enough, he went for the thrills, designing, building, and then piloting himself the fastest aircraft in the world. And then when that wasn't enough, he went for the power. And he secretly dealt political favors so that 2 U.S. presidents were like pawns in his hands. They were like pawns. All he ever wanted was more, and yet as he increased and grew on the outside, he began to shrink more and more and got smaller on the inside. And some of you might be familiar with his story. It's just tragic. By the end of his life, he was a figure of Gothic horror. That's how they describe him. Ready for the grave. Colorless. Emaciated. What's the word? Emaciated. I blew it in the 9 too, so. Isn't she awesome, my wife, just looking after me like that? Emaciated, collarless, only weighing 120 pounds, stretched over his 6 4-inch body. A thin, straggly beard went down his face, reached midway to his sunken chest. He had these hideous, long, grotesque yellow corkscrew fingernails that he never would cut. Many of his teeth were blackened, rotting stumps in his head because all he would ever eat was cake and candy. A tumor was beginning to emerge from the side of his head, and they say that there was innumerable needle marks all over his body because of his drug addiction and his phobia to germs. He was ruled by fear, and that was the end of his life. I mean, when you look at it, he started out being so successful. He ended out a broken man. Howard Hughes died all alone, a billionaire junkie with a big, massive, expanding world on the outside, and yet a miniature, shrinking, imploding world within. And that's why if we're ever going to embrace and walk in the larger, more expanded life that God has for us, it's vital. It's vital. It's crucial that we learn to do it from the inside out. That's where all success really comes from. And of course, Paul the Apostle, he understood this principle. He saw it in Genesis, and he mentioned it in Romans 1, verse 15. He says, "So as much as is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome." It's interesting. In other words, Paul's readiness, his ability to step out and preach the gospel to an expanded region, a new territory, to increase his life on the outside was directly related to how full and healthy he was on the inside. He said, "As much as is in me, I'm ready." Is in me. And so one of the questions I want to ask you this morning is, what is in you? How are you doing on the inside? I wonder how many of us think this way in our own lives. That before we make crucial decisions to increase, expand our lives outwardly, that we first take the time to look and take stock of how we are doing on the inside, how healthy, how strong, how full and robust is our inner life. I think if people did that more, I think you'd see less casualties and burnout in life. I think you would. I think you would see far greater measure of success individually, in marriages, in families. You'd see more success. You'd see more fruit. You'd see more happiness. You'd see more joy. You'd see it. And that's why it's so vital that we become conscious and aware, not just of what's happening on the outside of our lives. That's easy to do, but it's vital that we become conscious of what's going on deep within this thing called our heart. Our heart. Because according to the Bible, our heart, our inner life, is really where it all begins. It all starts there. I mean, the writer of Proverbs says it like this: "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life." You got to keep your heart. One translation says, "Keep watch over your heart with all care, so you will have a life." Another one says, "Guard your heart more than anything else, because the source of your life flows from it." And yet another one says, "Keep vigilant watch over your heart." That's where life starts. Life starts in the heart. Life starts on the inside, and then it's supposed to work its way out. That's the way God created us to be. And so because of that, we have a mandate here. This is a mandate given by God himself that we need to guard and keep. We need to preserve and protect. We need to monitor and maintain the state and condition of our heart, because if we lose there, I want you to hear me today, if we lose there, we'll lose everywhere else. We got to win in the area of our heart. And yet how many have found out that it's a whole lot easier said than done? Have you found that out? In fact, I find for me personally, this call to keep my heart healthy and strong is one of the greatest struggles I've ever faced in my life. It really is. I find it hard. The reason why is because there's so many things vying for my heart's affection and attention. Right? There's so many things wanting to steal our heart away and pollute our heart and clutter our heart. We're living in a war zone. There's a battle against the heart, and sometimes it gets so intense that we wonder, man, are we ever going to win the war? But I'm telling you, we got to win it. We got to win it. And so for the rest of our time together this morning, what I want to do is I want to share with you some of the things that I have learned along the way that have helped me win the battle of the heart. In other words, maintain heart health. Things that keep my inner life full and robust. And so I want to share those with you. Are you ready for some of those? Okay, turn to the person next to you and tell them you're bigger on the inside than you are on the outside. Tell them that. Bigger on the inside. It's the way we need to be. Anyway, the first thing I find when it comes to heart health, the first thing is to find it. Find it. And you may find that funny. Find it. Find your heart. Well, you know, it was in 1961 that Tony Bennett first performed the song that would end up launching him into his worldwide singing career. Some of you might remember it. It was called, "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." That's the name of it. I left my heart in San Francisco, a catchy tune with some real good lyrics, but I find that oftentimes I don't have to travel a tenth of that way, even a hundredth of the way, that distance, before I find myself losing my heart. In fact, sometimes I can lose it in the time it takes me to walk from my bedroom upstairs to the living room downstairs. It's like, wow, where's my heart? What did I do with it? Where did I forget it? I mean, I'm so absent-minded when it comes to this area of me called my heart. It's a struggle. And you know, maybe it's because of my personality, right? And anyone who knows me, I'm an A-type personality, and that means I'm goal-focused, I'm get up and go, let's just get something done, we got a world to win, we can talk about our feelings later. And so because of that, I have a tendency to run 10 miles ahead of my heart and leave it way back in the dust. Well, I'll pick it up later. Sometime. And I find that the heart is not like the mind, and the heart is not like the intellect. It cannot be rushed, and it cannot be hurried. Matter of fact, the heart is just on its own schedule altogether. And if you think you can run through life 1,000,000 miles an hour and have your heart just running with you, here I am, forget it. Your heart is not into that. Your heart does not respond to that. Your heart is not wired that way. And so I find I struggle with that, you know. I also struggle because of just the culture in which we live. I mean, it's so easy for us just to live in such a fast-paced, busy society, right? Barreling down the road 100 miles an hour, filling every space and slot with something until before we even know it, our heart is buried, it's covered, it's cluttered, it's smothered, it's submerged under mountains of things. And it takes 3 whole weeks holidays just to dig it out. You know, you ever see someone on holidays? Oh, why'd you come down to Cancun? I'm looking for my heart. They never say that, but that's why they're there. They're trying to find their heart, digging it out. If there was ever a culture that is prone to that, it's the one we live in now. It's so easy to misplace and lose our inner world. It's easy to lose our heart. Jesus spoke into this. In Matthew 15:8, he said, "These people draw near to me with their mouths. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." Right? In other words, they had close lips, they had close mouths, but they had far hearts. And I don't know about you, but I can sure relate to this verse. I can. That sometimes I find that I'm here in body, I'm here in mind, but for some reason my heart is simply not present. It's not here. It's failed to have showed up. That's not only true in my relationship with God. And many of you, you can put on your halo and say, it doesn't happen to me. I think it happens to all of us where we pray prayers and read scriptures and we're thinking about the next oil change we have to do in our car. Or what I'm going to bake for dessert when the family comes over for Easter. But we're praying. But our heart's not into it. I know it happens to me in my relationship with God. It happens in every other area of my life as well. In my marriage, in my family, my work, my ministry, my relationships, that sometimes my heart has just gone AWOL, absent without leave. Where are you? I left you somewhere. And yet, if we're ever going to be able to live the larger, expanded life God has, we're going to have to do it from our heart. We're going to have to find our heart again. Find it. Find it. And I know for me, finding my heart means doing things I don't like to do. It means asking myself questions that I don't like to ask. Questions that most men don't like to ask. And those are questions like, what am I feeling right now? And why? I hate those questions, right? I hate that. What am I feeling? What do feelings have to do with anything? We're on a mission for God. Most men, they would rather wrestle a man-eating alligator than to have to talk about feelings, ask questions about what am I feeling and why? And yet I have found, like I'm 56 years old, okay? I know I don't look it. But I have found in my 56 years of living that if I get out of touch with my heart, I am a train wreck just waiting to happen. I am. And so I have to ask myself, not just every Easter and Christmas, I have not just once a year, every once in a while, or when I get in a crisis, I have to actually stop through the day and ask myself questions like, what am I feeling and why? Because those questions can lead me to where my heart is really at. And I need to know where my heart is really at. Because when I don't, I just act weird. Clarice will say something simple like, why didn't you pick up your socks? And I'll go, socks! Why don't you pick those socks up? I'll think, why did I say that? It's just a pair of socks. So I think, wow, what was I feeling when I said that? Hopefully I feel it before I say it. I think before I speak. And I say, wow, I'm feeling ridiculed. I'm feeling belittled. Why would I feel belittled? I need to figure that out. Because when I figure that out, I find my heart. When I find my heart, I'm far more able to take on and step into the larger things God has for me. And so I would encourage all of you to do a daily heart monitoring. And again, how do you do that? What am I feeling and why? You can't heal what you don't feel. And the reason why some of us live such chronically broken lives is because we refuse to feel the pain, the fear, the resentment, the hurt. We like to fill ourselves. We like to numb ourselves. It's called addictions. We like to just pacify our hearts and fill them with all kinds of other things so we don't have to feel the things we feel are unpleasant. I would encourage you to have a daily monitoring time where you say, what am I feeling and why? Because that'll help you locate your heart. And so the first thing we do is we find it. The second thing we do is we feed it. Feed it. And of course, none of us think twice about how much time and effort we put into feeding ourselves or feeding our bodies, right? 3 squares a day. We don't think nothing about the effort it takes to do that, the shopping, the planning, the cooking, the cleaning. We don't think nothing about it. We don't think nothing of feeding our minds with formal education, ongoing training, because that's how we get successful in life. Feed our mind. And yet it always amazes me just how little time and effort we put into feeding and nurturing our heart, our inner life. We don't spend much time in that place. And because of it, we get big heads and shrinky little hearts. Big head, little heart. Big job, little heart. Big fat paychecks, but a heart that is poverty-stricken and 5 times smaller than it's supposed to be because we don't have a regular way of feeding it. And so for me, there are 3 main ways that I find I feed my heart. I call it soul food. Soul food. And I'll just share them with you. You know, the first thing is the thoughts that I think. That's one way I feed my heart. Just like food is to the body, water is to a plant, our thoughts are the nutrients that we give our hearts. And so what that means is that the more right, wholesome thoughts we can think, the more godly, noble, positive, faith-filled thoughts we can give our hearts, the healthier and stronger our inner life will be. Your thoughts are the food for your inner life. And of course, you see that. David, look at what David said in Psalm 143:4. He said, "Therefore my spirit is overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is distressed." David was about to suffer from SHS, right? He was in a very discouraging place. His heart was hurting, overwhelmed, distressed. And yet, what I find interesting is the remedy that David turns to fix it. And you see it here in the very next verse. He says, "My heart within me is distressed. I keep my what? I keep my what? I keep in mind the early days of the past, giving thought to all your," he's talking to God, "all God's act, even to the works of your hands." In other words, when David's heart was distressed and prolonged to shrinkage, prone to shrinkage, he fed it a diet of wholesome, healthy thoughts. He said, "I keep in mind the early days." What is he talking about? He's thinking about when God showed up in his life, all the times that God brought him through, all the times that God gave him victory over the bear, the lion, over Goliath. He's thinking about God's faithfulness in the past. And as he's thinking about it, his heart is building up, becoming stronger, more courageous, more robust. That is the diet he chose to feed himself when he found himself in the good places and the bad places. A diet of healthy, wholesome thinking was enough to strengthen his shrinking heart. And so with that in mind, the question I want to ask you this morning is, what tends to be your choice of food when it comes to the kinds of thoughts that you think? Okay. Your thought life. The thoughts you think about yourself, the thoughts you think about your spouse, the thoughts you think about your family, the thoughts you think about the economy, the thoughts you think about God, all those things. Are they negative? Are they gloomy? Are they small, limiting thoughts full of doubt and unbelief, fear, resentment, bitterness? Or are they positive, faith-filled, uplifting thoughts? Thoughts that are saturated and filled with the power and love of God. That is what our inner life thrives off of. And that's why we need to choose to think the right thoughts. You know, thinking is a choice. It really is. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is a choice. What you think is a choice you make, and what you think is what feeds your heart. That's why Paul says, he says, finally, this is a closing statement. Finally, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, then meditate on these things. Right? If there's anything noble and pure and just. In other words, that's the diet that'll keep our heart healthy. And I know it's not easy. I mean, sometimes you can turn on the news and, hear about all the stuff that's going on in the world, and it's easy to begin to meditate on that. It's easy to get down and discouraged about yourself. It's easy to look in the mirror and just all you see is all your failures and say, I'm nothing but a loser. It's easy to fall into that, but that is not going to cause your heart to grow. Matter of fact, those are heart withdrawals. You are going to cause yourself to have a heart attack, an inner implosion. You have to discipline yourself and say, I'm going to think on good things. Good, noble, positive things. That's what I need to feed my heart with. And so we feed our heart with the thoughts that we think. You know, the second thing is we feed our hearts with the places we rest, where I rest. You can tell a whole lot about the state and health of your inner life by what you do with the time you call your own. In other words, what you do when places you go to rest and get recharged. Tell a whole lot. And so let me say that if it's in front of your computer, checking and sending emails, even though you are no longer at work and you're not supposed to be working, then I wouldn't call that a healthy place of rest. If it's glued to the TV for hours on end, watching episode after episode on Netflix, then I wouldn't call that a healthy place of rest. If it's riveted on your iPhone, updating your Facebook page and playing Angry Birds, well, your family and friends are just a stone's throw away, then I wouldn't call that a healthy place. Speaking of Facebook, I saw this post on Facebook just the other day. Look at it. It says, no Wi-Fi here. Talk, what does it say? Talk to each other. What a novel idea. And call your mom. You know, that's the sign outside a restaurant, right? No Wi-Fi here. Right? We want you talking to others. Talking to others. Talk to someone. Talk to them. Yeah, talk to them. Because it fills our heart. You know, one time Clarice and I, we got a coupon to this really nice restaurant. It's like where you go for a romantic restaurant. Really nice, you know, the maitre d' could come this way, you know. You know, ambiance, candles, and so we sit down and we just start, you know, looking at the menu. And both of us, actually, I think Clarice mentioned it, we noticed a couple that were about 3 tables away, and they were sitting there and they were on their cell phones, right, in this romantic restaurant. I thought, well, probably they're just checking in with the babysitter. But I mean, you know, they ordered, and then they went back to their cell phones, and then they ate their appetizer. I mean, they were on their cell phone the whole meal. I felt like getting up and saying, put those things away and love one another. Let's have a group hug. But I just left them alone. And so the places we go for refueling and rest say a whole lot about both the depth and health of our inner life. And that's why it's vital that we do the things that really feed and fill up the deep hunger in our hearts. It's vital we do that. Jeremiah the prophet, God through the prophet said this, for my people have done 2 evil things. They have abandoned me, the fountain of living water, and they have dug for themselves cracked cisterns that can hold no water at all. 2 evils, 2 things that are wrong. Firstly, they forsook and abandoned God, the fountain of living water. They said, we don't need it. We don't need you, God. And then they dug for themselves broken cisterns. That's just like surface stuff that can hold no water, just surface stuff. We just stay on the surface. It's just a life on the surface. You know, James Hollis said the greatest insult, the greatest abuse we can ever do to our heart is to live a life with no depth. That's the greatest insult we can ever inflict upon a human heart, is to live a life of no depths. And God's heart is broken in this verse. He says they've forsaken me, but not only have they forsaken me, they're killing themselves with this surface kind of rest and refueling. And that's why the psalmist in Psalm 23, so powerful, he says, he leads me, he makes me lie down in green pastures, and sometimes it takes a making. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Restores my soul. He restores my heart. You know, this word restore literally means to mend, to heal, to repair, to turn back to its original state. And I don't know about you, but I know there's times in my life when my heart is anything but in its original state. It's weary, it's broken, it's frightened, it's anxious, it's arrogant, it's proud, It's resentful, it's angry, it's dull, it's asleep, and it takes a good rest by God's still water to turn and restore it back to where it should be. And so the question I want to ask you this morning is, where are your still waters? All of us need them. We need to find out what refuels our tank. All of us need to find our still water. It's our responsibility before God to find out exactly where those still waters are and go to them often, drink from them often. And if that means setting your alarm clock a little earlier so you can develop some still water there, alone time with God, whatever it is. I don't know how you do it, where your waters are. I mean, your waters need to run deep. You cannot expect to live the life God has called you to live without daily dips in the still waters of the Lord. It's called solitude when you're alone with God. Times of solitude. We need them in our lives on a regular basis. You know, I always say there's two people you come in contact with in the place of solitude. The first person is God. Isaiah said, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. That's the first person you meet in the still waters of solitude. But the second person you meet is yourself. He said, woe is me, I am undone. And you know, that is where transformation happens. When you meet God and meet yourself in that place of still waters, that is when you are transformed. You're strengthened from the inside out. And so I would encourage you to find your still waters. Whatever that means for you, you need to find it. We live in a day that is so perilous when it comes to heart health. You find it. And so we feed our hearts through the thoughts we think, through the places we rest. You know, the other thing that feeds my heart is the amount I play. You know, one of the things I noticed about myself, and Clarice has pointed this out as well, is that the larger, more demanding my life gets on the outside, the less desire and time I have for this thing called play. I don't have time to play. Life is too serious for play. And yet oftentimes that's the very thing we need the most when it comes to keeping our hearts full and strong. It's a regular, consistent times of play. We need to learn how and practice this thing called play. The writer of Proverbs says, a merry heart does good like a medicine, but broken spirit dries up the bone. A merry heart, a happy heart, a playful heart is going to fill us up from the inside out. And so the question I want to ask you this morning is, when was the last time you did some play? When was the last time you made your heart merry? When was the last time you really laughed, and not just a little, but a real good belly laugh, where you fell on the floor, you couldn't handle it? Well, I don't do things like that. I'm a Christian. It's a serious hour in which we live, don't you know? The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and you're lying on the floor with a belly laugh. Well, I'll tell you, the only way we're going to save the world is to learn to play a little bit more. It's the only way. You know, Mark Buchanan, in his book called The Rest of God, he says it like this. He said, if there's one God of the age that Christians especially pay homage to, it's the God of utility. As a tribe, we're deeply devoted to utilitarianism. Everything we do, we seek to justify on the grounds of its usefulness. What is missing is a theology of play. There's many things like eating ice cream, diving off cliffs, sleeping in on Saturday mornings, and learning bird calls that can't be shoehorned in the utilitarian scheme, try as we might. They add nothing to the gross national product. They enhance our intellect not one bit. They don't improve our figures, hone our skills, or increase our red blood cell count. But they might just make us feel more alive, more ourselves, filling and refreshing our souls. That's how important play has in our lives. And so I want to encourage you to do more of it. Don't be so serious. Learn to laugh at yourself. In fact, I want to give you some homework this week. You need to go out and play. That's your homework. Go out and play. Play with your spouse. Play with your family. Play with your friends. And if you don't have anyone else, play with your dog. If you don't have a dog, borrow the neighbor's dog and play with it. Just make sure you bring it back. Find something you can do that you really enjoy and have a good time. That'll fill your heart. That'll cause strength to come back in the side of you so you can live your life the way God has called you to. And so the first thing when it comes to heart health is find it. Second thing is feed it. We're going to close. Fasten it. Fasten it. You know, speaking of dogs, growing up, we had a dog by the name of Finnegan. We actually had two dogs. One was named Finnegan, the other one was named Casey. And some of you might be old enough to remember that. What is that? Mr. Dress Up. Casey and Finnegan. We had a dog named Casey and Finnegan. Both were great pets. Finnegan, friendly and smart, but the one bad habit old Finnegan had was he had this uncanny ability to escape from the backyard no matter what we did to try and keep him in. He was just notorious. Sometimes he'd dig a hole right under the fence. At first, he used to crawl the fence, right? Like a ladder. I mean, if YouTube was around back then, I'd be a millionaire by now. Fence climbing dog. We used to make the fence really high, and then he would dig under the fence, and then after we fill it all in, then he would jimmy the gate with his paw and somehow open it. It seemed no matter what we did, he was never content and satisfied to just stay at home. He was prone to wander. And you know, when I thought about that and what our dog was like, I couldn't help but see a parallel between what happens when it comes to our heart and our inner life. It's just prone to wander. Seems like no matter what we give it or feed it or entertain it with or soothe it or comfort it with, it has this propensity to wander, to just want to get up and wander off, to stray away. That is the nature of our heart. You saw that with the children of Israel. God manifests himself in power on Mount Sinai, gives them the 10 Commandments. They said, we'll do it, sir. Every jot and tittle of it, sir. You can count on us, sir. And 3 weeks later, what are they doing? Running after the pagan gods of the people around them, committing adultery, worshiping idols. I find the same inclination dwells within all of us, that when left on its own, my heart is prone to stray and wander from the very place it needs to be attached to and fixed to for its own health and its own safety. You know, David, in 1 Chronicles 29:8, prays this prayer for his people. He says, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. He says, our fathers, keep this forever in the intent and thoughts of the heart of your people, and fix our hearts towards you. Fix our hearts. Fasten our hearts on you, O Lord. That was his prayer. Reattach my heart to you, God, because it is so prone to wander. In Psalm 63:6, he says, as I lie on my bed, I remember you. Through the long hours of the night, I think about you. You have been my help. In the shadow of your wings, I sing joyfully. My soul clings to you. It clings to you. In other words, David knew that the only way he was going to make it to what God had, to succeed in what God has called him to do, was to cling to God himself, reattach his heart to the person of God. And we need to do the same thing. Some of us here this morning need to take some time to maybe refasten and attach our heart back to God, the source from where all life flows from. Back to Christ, where all strength, all hope, all joy, all peace, all mercy, all forgiveness, all courage and faith is found. It's attaching ourselves back to him, regardless of what's going on around us. That is the key to ongoing heart health. It's fixing and clinging to him. And so this morning we're going to close. I'm going to ask the worship team to come. And we're going to sing that song that they led us in. Why don't we stand? And I want us to just close this morning with some reflection. Okay, there's so much that could be said, right? Because there's some of us here this morning, if we were to be honest with ourselves, we'd have to admit that we've lost our heart. When it comes to our career or marriage or God's plan and dream for our lives, we've lost our heart. We're bigger on the outside than we are on the inside. We don't have the joy, the passion. We go through life just going through the motions. We're an empty shell. We put on a brave front. People ask us, how are we doing? Oh, great. How's the wife? Fine. How's the job? Awesome. But inside, our heart has shrunk 2, 3, 5 times its normal size, and it's almost like we are suffocating from the inside out. And we call it life. You call this life? God has so much more for every one of us if we just reattach ourselves to Him. You'll never find your heart without the help of God. It's a quest that will end in failure after failure after failure, because there's some things that we can't do for ourselves, and one thing that we can't do is find the heart that we've lost. We can't do it. Only God can give it back.